Today we're gonna weave a super easy basic twill mug rug. So let's get started. I'm gonna be using our mini recycled acrylic loom for this project. If you wanna grab one for yourself, check out the link in the description box below. We will be using a pattern for this project. It's totally free. Again, links for the pattern, the tools, materials, all in the description box below. I'm gonna be using 8/8 cotton, which is our thickest warp string. And I'm gonna just get started with tying an overhand knot, creating a loop in the string. We're gonna be double warping the loom, which just means there's 2 strings between each of the notches. So I'll show you how to do that now. We need 32 total strings. So I'm going to put this on the first peg on the bottom of my loom, and then I'm gonna bring it up and wrap it around the first peg on the top. Then when I come back, we're going in the second groove to the third, and then when I come back, I'm gonna go back in this same groove, and that's where our double warping begins. We need 32 total strings. So we're just going up, wrapping around, and we're putting those 2 strings between each notch. Now you don't wanna pull too hard on your warp string, but you also don't want it to be super loose. This can kind of be a trial and error sort of thing, but just remember that you want somewhere in between. You don't want too tight, you don't want too loose. So for this particular loom, 32 strings is pretty much the max we're gonna get on here. So when I get to the very end, you can see I'm going through the last peg here, but I'm gonna go back up, looping it around that last peg at the top, and then I'm gonna come back down here and loop it back around this peg. So this is kind of a weird double here, but that's totally fine. Then I'm going to cut the string off, leaving myself a good amount of slack. And I'm just going to grab one of the strings on the end and tie a knot. This is just to secure this warp while we're weaving, the warp being the vertical strings. And it doesn't matter too much, so don't overthink this part. Just get it knotted in there so that it can't come off. And then something I like to do is tape down my loom. If you're working flat on your table like I am, you can just grab some painter's tape and create just little rolled up pieces of tape, put one on each corner, and that's gonna help your loom stay put. Now we're gonna create the base work for this little mug rug so that everything stays nice and secure once it's off of the loom. So I'm going to be using Bernat Handicrafter cotton, and I'm going to grab about 5 widths. Let me see, 1, 2, yeah. We're gonna grab 5 widths, and I'm gonna go all the way across my loom, not just the warp, for these 5 widths. And then I always like to grab just a little bit extra so I make sure I have all that I need. The reason I'm using this instead of the warp string itself for this part is just because this is a little bit thicker than the warp string. I don't love using this as the warp string because it has a little bit of give to it, whereas the warp string is not stretchy at all. So now we're going to do a row of twining followed by a few rows of plain weave. This is the way that I like to do twining. We're first going to do a row of plain weave. Plain weave or tabby, same meaning exactly, is the most basic form of weaving. You're just going over one string, under one string, over one string, under. So I'm gonna do that row of plain weave. And then I'm pulling my weft string, weft being the horizontal string. I'm gonna pull that all the way through, and we're gonna leave a tail. Leave your tail, this is why we took extra, a little bit long, because as we do the twining, it is actually gonna pull that in a little bit. So I'm gonna leave that about 4 to 5 inches beyond my loom. Then I'm going to take my tapestry needle, and because I'm working from left to right, I'm pointing my needle down this way. So the left, down to the right at an angle. Everywhere the weft string, our horizontal string, is going over a warp string, we're gonna go underneath it and through at this angle. So you can see how I'm grabbing it. So I'm coming in at an angle, I'm gonna pull that through, and then I'm slowly going to sort of tighten up that string as we go, because we really want this to lock everything in. So now I'm skipping the next string because the weft is going under the warp, and I'm going to the next string where the weft is going over the warp. And again, I can grab both of those strings, tighten them, not too much. We don't want to be doing this. We don't want there to be an angle on our warp. We want that to stay straight, but we want the twining to be nice and secure on the warp strings. So again, I'm skipping the next string, going to the one after that where the weft is going over the warp and creating that twining stitch. I'm going to continue this process all the way across the loom. So I've created that twining stitch. It's nice and secure and firm. You do want to make sure that it's sitting fairly straight on your loom. You can see I'm going up from the bottom of the loom a little bit because I want my mug rug to have a little bit of fringe. So I'm staying up, it's about 1.5 inches from the bottom of the loom. Next, I'm going to do a few rows of plain weave. This is just going to add some extra structure to the bottom of the mug rug. So I'm just going to go over one, under one again. So I finished this string that's attached to my needle going under this far warp string. So the next row I am going to be going over. So we're going over one, under one, all the way across. Now I'm at the end. I'm making sure my weft is sitting snugly against the warp string, but not tight like this. We want to try to keep our warp strings as straight as possible. Then I'm creating a nice arch. You can strum your strings a little bit, and then you can take your weaving comb and just push that down. Now we're not reaming on it, we're just pushing it down against the twining. The reason we have to create this arch when we're weaving is that we need some slack in order for our warp not to just kind of start sucking in at the sides. We need that slack so that the string, the weft, is truly going over and under and not just across the piece, making it tighter and tighter as we go further. So the next row, again, we're just doing over one, under one. But now you can see it is the opposite of what we did in the previous row. And that's what creates a plain weave or tabby structure, is just this over one, under one, and then the next row is the opposite on top of that. So again, I'm making sure it's snug on the side, but not too tight. You can even use your tapestry needle to sort of just beat down just the edge. So we're creating that arch, giving it a strum, and then we're just gonna go in with the weaving comb and push it down against the previous row. Now this part I am going pretty tight because again, I just want it to be super secure at the bottom. So I'm gonna do one more row of plain weave. I don't wanna leave it loose like this. I'm gonna push it down against there. You can see that it's coming in a little bit, and a little bit is normal. We just wanna make sure it's not too much. You can always kind of go back, pull that back out a little, and that's looking pretty good to me there. Now with this string, I'm gonna wrap it, because it came under this far warp string, I'm just gonna wrap it back around that, and I'm gonna leave this tail fairly long. We're gonna tuck that in later. Next, I'm grabbing 2mm cotton string. I'm using this beautiful yellow color, and I like to work with maybe 3 arms lengths at a time. I just find any more than this is a little bit annoying. So I'm gonna go with 3 this time. On such a small piece, this might even be a little excessive, but that's okay. This pattern is super easy. So the entire pattern is only 4 rows, and then it starts to repeat, which is why it kind of makes it a little bit easier. You can grab an extra piece of paper to cover up the rows you're not working on. This just makes it easier to focus on one. On the patterns that I create, any of the colored in blocks are representing going over a warp string. And then all the white blocks represent going under a warp string. So in this case, we would be going over 3 warp strings, under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2. And you can see that repeat now, right? Over 2, under 2. So it's very similar to plain weave in that way. I left the blocks on the very edges a lighter color, simply because this is just representing me giving you the instruction on what to do on the edges, even though it technically disrupts the pattern. So if I cover up those edges, you can see that our pattern isn't disrupted. So it's just that over 2, under 2, and then it staggers each row. When I add these in, it's like, what's going on there? It's just so that our edges will be nice. So let's work on a few rows together. I'm gonna cover up all the other rows. So I'm working from right to left in this case. Over 3, under 2, over 2, under 2, and then we're gonna continue over 2, under 2, all the way across the warp. Once we get to the very end, we're going over 3 warp strings again. So you can see it's the same on the left and the right. And just like we did at the bottom, I'm going to leave a tail that will be tucked in later. So I'm gonna leave that, again, decently long, about the same length as the other one. Create my little arch and then push that row down. So that's the first row of the pattern. Super easy. We're gonna go to the next row. So now we're working on row 2. And again, this one is easy, but it's not symmetrical. So you need to pay attention to that. So on this one, we're going under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2, and we're going all the way across doing that until we get to the very end. Then at the end, we have under 2, which I've just done, over 1, under 1. The longer you choose this weft string to be when you begin, the less ends you have to tuck in. So that's another reason I like to work with a fairly long piece. This basic form of twill is something you will start to see everywhere. It's on jeans. It's on a lot of different pillows and different home decor that you're gonna find around, as well as your clothing. You'll start to notice it everywhere. Now again, we don't wanna push down super hard. And this basic twill is a really good way to sort of learn how to beat your weft down evenly, because if you don't, this line that's going to be created by the twill is going to be crooked. So you want to pay really close attention to getting that the same as much as you can on each row. So now we can scooch our paper up so that we're looking at row 3, and we're back to another symmetrical row. So we're going over 1, under 2, and then it's just that over 2, under 2, all the way across until we get back. So we've gone all the way across, and now we're at the end and we're going under 2, and then this will just be over 1. So again, we've got that snug against the edge without pulling it in a bunch, creating our arch, and you can start to see that pattern come through. So last but not least, we have row 4. So we're gonna start with under 1, over 1, and then it's that under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2, all the way across till the very end on this one. So you can see at the very end, we're still going under 2. So now all you have to do is go back to row 1 and keep weaving that over and over again. If you want to, you can rewind and you can go back to where I started row 1 and just keep repeating those 4 rows over and over. You can weave as many rows as you want until your mug rug or coaster is the length that you want. All right, so I just finished my piece of string and I've decided that my mug rug is a totally fine length. So I wove the pattern, so that's 4 rows, 7 times, and then I ended on the first row just because I had enough string. And also because I like when my string ends going over a warp string. It just makes it easier to tuck in. So I'm gonna leave that there, and we're gonna do the process we did at the bottom, at the top now. But we're gonna do it in reverse. So first I'm going to do 3 rows of plain weave, then a twining stitch. So I'm actually just grabbing 4 and a little bit in terms of length. And we do have to cut a new string when we actually start our twining, and I'll show you why in a minute. So I've done 3 rows. This next row of plain weave, I'm not going to push down yet because we need to do the twining stitch over top of it. Then I'm going to take a new piece. We're gonna do it fairly long. And I'm gonna use this to create my twining. The reason that we can't turn around and just do twining with one continuous string in this case is because when we turn around and start going this way, it's going to want to pull all of these warp strings in tighter and tighter, which is going to not be nice looking at the end. So that's why I'm grabbing a new piece. And now I can do my twining stitch on top of that the exact same way that we did before, but to start it, because there's a loop right here, I am just going through that loop to start, and then I can just start going in the spots where the weft is going over the warp. And we want to make sure that there's a nice long tail here, but same as the bottom, we want to tighten it up little by little as we go so it's nice and secure. So unfortunately, I made this string a little bit short for the size of needle that I'm trying to use to do it with. So I just grabbed one of these little plastic yarn needles that I have, and I'm gonna do my twining stitch with that instead because it just keeps coming unthreaded on me. So this will make it a little bit easier for this. All right, so we have everything woven. Now you'll notice that this is a little bit looser than this. So I am gonna go back in with my comb and I'm gonna push that down just a little bit, just so that it looks more equal to what the bottom does and everything's nice and tight. Now we can flip it over to tuck in the ends. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull all the ends from the front into the back so that we don't miss any. Unfortunately, there's a lot of ends on this part, but that's okay. Let's do the easy ones first, which are the yellow ends in my case. I'm gonna thread this plastic tapestry needle. This actually might be a little bit big. Let's grab something smaller. So I like to fold over my string and push it through the needle that way. Now, what we want to do is we want to tuck these into the channels of the twill. I'm going to go into here. Ideally, I would go over here, but this is kind of a long reach, so I don't want to do that. So I'm going to go in through these loops and I'm grabbing 3. I don't want to go to the very end, and I'm going to pull this through. Now, what you want to check when that's in there, you can see that we're not seeing the needle on the front. And when I pull that through, let's just double check we're not really seeing it, and we aren't. Now, because that's not very many strings, I think I might want to tuck them back in this way as well. So I'm gonna go just across here. I'm gonna grab 3 or 4 more loops. 4 seems good to me here. And I'm gonna pull this through, and we don't wanna pull tight because we don't wanna sort of disrupt our pattern. You can see here again on the front, you can't see what I just did. Then I'm going to trim this off close to where it's coming out without cutting anything we don't want to be cutting. And I'm gonna just do that same exact thing with this last string up here. Now we need to deal with all these smaller strings. And I think for the most part, we're gonna do it the same way that we just did. It's gonna be really hard to try to sew this into this section. So this one, I'm just gonna take up right to here, and I'm gonna go up several loops just because this string is thinner and I don't want it to come out. So I'm gonna go up that. And again, I'm gonna flip it over and look at the front. If you look super closely, you can kind of notice it, but it's really hard to see, so I'm happy with that. Now this string, even though it's difficult, I'm gonna weave into the white area just because it's coming from all the way down here, and I don't want there just to be this big loop right here. So I'm going to sew this into this one loop here first, if I can get it through. So if you can see that, we're gonna pull that through just so there's less of a jumping over. Then I'm gonna go through those same loops I did with the yellow in this case, just because that's kind of the closest spot to take it. Now, instead of going back down this way, I think I'm gonna go up this way, so we're not creating too much bulk. And if you're really worried about things shifting, you could even go back down this way. Again, making really sure I'm only grabbing these back weft strings and not the warp strings. So now I'm basically just gonna repeat that same process for all the rest of these strings. We have a little bit of, we have a lot of strings right here. So I'll show you how I'm gonna do that. But first, let's get this one done. Okay, so I tucked in that one string down here. This one, I'm gonna try to go over here with, and we might do that for both of these strings, but I'm gonna go through one of the loops of this off-white color first, and then bring it down through this channel. So I've tucked in all the ends. I'm gonna cut off these last 2. Then I'm flipping it back around, and I wanna make sure again that this is all sitting how we want it to sit. Make sure that that's pretty straight. And there's a couple different ways that you can cut this off. You can go ahead and use a straight edge and mark a line with a water-soluble pen or a marker. I'm just gonna wing this. So if that hurts your heart, just look away. I'm just gonna be really careful and try to cut this nice and straight. I'm leaving it about I don't know, 3/4 of an inch or so. Now I'm leaving it attached on the other side, and I'm gonna pull it tight as I cut it. Now I wanna make sure that's sitting there nicely. So I'm just gonna pull it and try to cut it about the same length. Now we're gonna brush out the fringe so it looks a little bit more floofy. Now you can use a cat brush or a rope brush, which is essentially just a cat brush. I'll link it down below. And I'm just gonna go across and carefully comb out the strands of the fringe. Now I can tell that this isn't quite straight, so I'm just gonna carefully just trim it off a little bit. That looks pretty good to me. All right, without further ado, let's have a look at this cute little coaster or mug rug, whichever term you prefer. If you enjoyed this video and you want to try a more complicated pattern next, check out this video. I love it. It's so cute. This one is a good standard coaster size. I will even put my cup on it so you can see. Oh, that's kind of trippy. But it's like the perfect size for just like a standard cup.